What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before I jump in, as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week on YouTube. Plenty to get into today. Obviously, Bundesliga Premier League season's coming to an end this weekend. I'm going to talk about that. Going to do a check-in on Major League Soccer. Haven't covered that on this show in a little while. But before that, I haven't gotten an opportunity to talk about what is the biggest story probably in this sport right now. It happened over the weekend. I knew it was going to take a little while to sort of let everything play out. And there were other things I wanted to cover on the weekend look ahead. So I just decided I was going to save it for this show on Wednesday when I had more time to talk about it and more information, and kind of we were able to see how this developed. And I'm really glad I did wait. Not that there's anything wrong with an immediate reaction, but now I get to respond to everything that has happened, not just saying the obvious stuff at the beginning, like players shouldn't be subject to racial abuse while playing a sport. And the first thing I want to lay out very clearly here is if you want to say Vinicius gets too emotional at times, lets his emotions get the best of him, doesn't have as much composure as you would like for a superstar, that is fine. There's probably some truth to that. However, that is not a conclusion you get to draw based on somebody's response to being racially abused, especially if you, like me, are someone who has no personal experience with being racially abused. It is a whole different level. There's a dehumanization factor to it. Vinicius' response, the the red card, the the fact he sometimes gets into it with fans, all of that is out of bounds for this conversation. None of it is pertinent. It's a separate conversation that can be had, but it's a conversation that can only be had once the racial element is removed. Because we don't know what it looks like without the racial element, because this has been happening all season. And he's obviously tired of it, and he's doing something about it, and good for him. And this is why the way media covers things and the way narratives develop is so important. Because what you saw a bunch of, and even before this game, remember the reporter who asked Jurgen Klopp if somehow Vinicius was inviting this kind of, I don't remember if it was specifically racial abuse, but inviting criticism by the way he behaves. And Klopp was indignant, and rightfully so. What kind of question is that? Why is that even something you're putting forward as a actual thing that needs to be discussed? And then you go look at the headlines around Spain, and some of the even Ancelotti's conversations. There was a reporter asking him about it. I think this idea that somehow Vinicius is inviting this kind of behavior by the way he is acting. And the media going along with that, the media throwing in, and particularly, I'm just generalizing, saying there are members of the media, and you saw it all over the place in Spain, in particular. Right? That idea didn't come out of thin air. And that is one of the first steps that has to be addressed in a situation like this, outside of obviously preventing the racism from happening in the first place and preventing players from being racially abused in the first place, is there has to be a collective effort to to say no. There is not going to be this idea that is entertained that somehow Vinicius is at fault for this. And yet, that was part of the conversation. And then Javier Tebas comes in, president of La Liga, and just makes things worse by also victim blaming Vinicius, at least to a certain extent, in his initial response. And then he comes back, and now he's saying he didn't intend to insult Vinicius or whatever phrase he used. It's easy to say that now that the entire world's looking at Spain going, and La Liga going, what are you doing? First impressions matter. They matter a great deal. And I'm sure they matter a great deal to Vinicius. And the message that was sent from La Liga is somewhere between you need to accept some responsibility to this, for this, and there's nothing we can do about it. Which is the next thing I wanted to cover. There are so many layers to this. And so many different angles I want to kind of highlight because it's some of it is soccer specific, some of it is societal, and it all needs to be discussed. It is important to recognize here what La Liga has been saying and what Tebas was trying to say, if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, and that he just worded really poorly, if you want to kind of go to bat for him. There is only so much La Liga can do in terms of the kind of action that is warranted in a situation like this. That is true. However, there are also plenty of things La Liga can do. One of those things is put pressure on the people who can take the extreme action that many people are calling for and would be completely justified. Look what happened. The competition committee, or whatever it's called, imposed a partial stadium ban. That wasn't La Liga because La Liga can't do that. Can La Liga help that happen? Absolutely. Look what a little bit of pressure did. You can also put some pressure on teams to take responsibility and to not promote ideas such as somehow this is, at least in part, Vinicius' fault. And don't add to the problem, but come out from the beginning and say, we as a league have a racism problem. La Liga chose not to do that either. Another option, be part of the larger solution by working to explain to fans why racial abuse is not just another form of smack talk or taunting or whatever you want to call it. Because that's part of the problem here too, is that at least from everything you're seeing and hearing and reading, it does not seem that there is a general acceptance within the fans of La Liga that this is over the line and that this is different than just saying something to a player, telling them how bad they are, whatever it might be. Two completely different things. And that distinction does not seem to have been drawn the way it needs to be. La Liga could be part of that. And then, as I mentioned before, start really putting pressure on teams. Because still, with this partial stadium ban, you have Valencia coming out saying something to the effect of they're disappointed in the punishment because all of their fans are getting punished for the actions of a few. I'm sorry, a few? What do you mean by a few? And I don't think those were the actual words Valencia said in the statement, but you get the point. That's what they were trying to suggest, is that somehow all of these fans are being punished because of a couple bad eggs. No, no, no. That is not what happened. That's part of the issue here, too, is that there has been this denial kind of every step of the way by people and by organizations who could play a meaningful role in preventing this from happening and from making progress. La Liga falls into that category, Valencia falls into that category. I know a couple of Valencia's players. I saw Yunus Musa put out a statement in support of Vinicius. That's helpful. That's important. Shouldn't go unnoticed. But the way that this has played out, it almost feels like every step has just been forced by the public pressure, which kudos to Vinicius for keeping the pressure up. Kudos to the rest of the world for looking at this going, what is happening here? How are we operating this way in 2023? And so there are some things that have happened. That stadium ban, the partial stadium ban, is a big deal. It's an important step in the right direction. And situations like this generally are tricky because and the other part of this is that, arrests have been made. Bans have been handed out to individuals. And that's the step that can always be taken. Is that if you can identify people, you handle them individually first. The problem with this in particular, though, and I alluded to it earlier, is that this was not a couple fans. And at that point, maybe you can get some individuals, but this is too big to be going after individual people and leave it at that. So what are your next options? As the Spanish Federation, the people who can actually take those next steps. Stadium bans and points deductions. And I don't know what the exact right answer is on how to handle this. Part of me is hesitant to immediately go to a points deduction on the first instance. Because now, that has more impact on the players than anything else, especially with a Valencia team trying to avoid relegation. If it comes to that, though, it comes to that. So we're going to have to see moving forward if stadium bans become the new policy, if this makes a difference. And there's certainly reason to be optimistic, and there's plenty of reason to be pessimistic too. I mean, the Mexican men's national team is still trying to get the chant to go away. Fans just keep doing it. I don't know what happens next here. Something got done, and that is good. That is important. But it feels like it took an awful lot of effort from a lot of people who aren't directly involved in this, or who shouldn't have to be leading this charge in the case of Vinicius, to get this done. And who knows how much of an impact it actually makes moving forward. That's incredibly disappointing. And it's an incredible indictment on La Liga and Spain in general. And it also makes you wonder what would have happened if this wasn't Vinicius. The crown jewel of that league, playing for perhaps the biggest club in the world, playing for who, represents a country in Brazil that is as connected to the sport as just about any country in the world. Right? Vinicius has a massive brand and a massive platform. And to his credit, he is willing to fight. He's using it. Do we even get to this point if it's not Vinicius and we're not talking about one of the most promising, guys in his early 20s in the entire world potentially leaving a league because he's tired of getting racially abused by fans? And he brings it up, and Real Madrid have generally had his back, I would argue, in terms of filing some complaints and trying at least a little bit to help, and he hasn't really gotten anywhere until now, when he just kind of said enough is enough, and this entire force kind of got behind him and said, this is ridiculous. And the final part of this is purely from a kind of cynical economic standpoint, outside of all the morality stuff. This is just bad for La Liga. It's not in La Liga's best. Well, I guess if you're going to. I would still argue. No, I'm going to stick with my original point. It's not in La Liga's best interest to try and pretend like there's not a racism problem when somebody like Vinicius is highlighting it, and it's occurring at a club like Real Madrid, because, one, you might lose one of your biggest names. Ask La Liga how it's working without Messi and Ronaldo. And two, if this doesn't change, what other promising young player like Vinicius wants to come to this league? Are you going to upset some fans? And again, I'm talking about this purely cynically, not in this is what La Liga should be thinking. Yeah, probably. But the end product is more important. And it's all getting laid out there about how La Liga feels about this and how Spain feels about this. And everybody is watching now. In large part because of Vinicius and his courage. What are you going to do next? What are you going to do the next time this happens? What if it happens to a player who's not Vinicius and who doesn't necessarily want to use their platform for whatever reason to go to war, for lack of a better phrase, against the president of the league? And then there's the other parts of why did it take this long for something to be done? But you can't solve anything until you admit there's a problem. And at least there are some people within the Spanish Federation in particular who are admitting there is a problem. That is somewhere to begin, and they're trying to do something about it. But when it's this many people, right, it's not one or two that you can pick out, identify, and isolate. That's on everybody. And it's not fair to everyone, but that's the price that has to be paid to eradicate this. It's obviously on the fans, and it's on the club for not finding a way to wipe it out. And you gotta get people to, even if you're not going to change everybody's minds, right? You could argue that's not soccer's job, because obviously this is a broader societal systemic issue that has permeated into the sport, but goes well beyond the sport. So maybe you can't change everybody's minds, but you can at least stop this from happening, or put in a really valiant effort to stop this from happening in stadiums, and to come down really hard on whoever it takes when it does. And this is something we haven't seen before, this kind of punishment. Again, it's positive, it's a starting point. It's just unbelievable that we're here talking about this. And I really do encourage you, if you haven't already, go see, I retweeted one of them, go see some of the headlines and the way this was being covered in Spain. because that part of this is incredibly important, how it is framed. This is not an incident involving Vinicius. This is not Vinicius somehow contributing and riling up fans. This is a person being racially abused. Full stop. None of that other stuff can come into the conversation until the racism aspect is dealt with. And we are a long way, unfortunately, from that happening based on the way that these events have unfolded. Good for you, Vinicius. I genuinely hope he stays in La Liga because he is part of, he is foundational to that league at this point. He clearly loves that club. And it would just be a really sad commentary on the entire sport, on society, if Vinicius, this guy, felt that he could no longer play in one of the top leagues in the world because of the way he was treated by fans and the league and the country's refusal to do anything to really stop it. So we'll see. He would certainly be justified in leaving. But you do hope that the fact that something was done, the fact that there have been some arrests made in some of these incidents now, the fact that his team really showed up for him and Real Madrid as an entity showed up for him in the days after this, that reminds him that he is supported, that he is loved. It's just baffling. It's sad. It's embarrassing. So good for you, Vinicius. There's a lot of layers to this, and because it's much more complex, even just from this incident, than just saying, "Wow, that is horrible. He was treated that way," and that there wasn't immediate action that was taken. Because it's also about the way it has been framed and the pushback that has had to come against the Spanish media, against La Liga, to even get it to this point, when it should be obvious to everyone that this is simply not okay. But at least that work is being done. Those voices are out there, led by Vinicius. And hopefully this is the beginning of a turning point in Spain and La Liga, because it should be a destination league. It should be a league where players of Vinicius' quality want to play and where they feel not just supported, but feel like the big deal that they are in this sport. He's a superstar, playing for one of the biggest clubs in the world. If that guy isn't immune to this, then who is? And also, maybe it takes, as unfortunate as it is, maybe it takes that kind of player with that kind of platform showing the courage Vinicius had to continue to highlight this, to continue to bring it into a conversation, to continue to hold people accountable. Maybe that is what it takes. At this point, that's all we can hope for, is that this is a turning point and Vinicius is able to add to his already incredible legacy as one of kind of the people who really helped turn the tide when it came to racism in La Liga. So, bravo, Vinicius. This is something you should have never had to deal with, obviously. But you just got to applaud him for the way he is going about it and trying to use his leverage and his influence as a global superstar to make a difference in the world.